again, this is Erica with A Needle and Thread in Old Town Spring, and this video is to show you how to make block number 4 of the Lucky Stars Block of the Month quilt. Today's quilt block is this Pinwheel star block. The pattern has it in purple and red with a white background, but today we're not using, of course, those colors because we like our colors better, right? So we're going to use this pretty floral brown and this pink lattice with flowers in it, along with a white background, and these are all from Riley Blake's Granny Chic line designed by Lori Holt. I am selling these kits block at a time. They are going to be available in my shop, so if you would like to quilt along with these videos, you are more than welcome to order one of those kits and follow along with us as we go through this entire quilt. That being said, the cutting instructions tell you how to cut all of your fabrics, and it also gives you instructions on how to cut for a secondary block, which is this simple 9 patch in black and white. We're not going to do the 9 patch. We haven't been doing the secondary blocks in this series because I feel that having worked through the other elements for the primary blocks, you have the skills that you need to make that secondary block on your own. So we did the cutting for just the primary block, and the cutting is enough to make 3 of these blocks. These blocks will finish off at a finished size of 12.5 inches, which is a pretty big size block. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so to get going on our sewing today, the pattern wanted us to cut 4-inch squares from our 2 main colors. It wanted 3.5-inch squares. This is also a 3.5-inch square, and then this is a 3.5 by 6.5-inch rectangle. This rectangle and the 3.5-inch squares are going to be used for the flying geese elements, and then your 4-inch squares are going to be used for the half square triangle blocks. Now, in order to make the half square triangle blocks, just as a quick refresher, I've done the majority of mine already to make the 3 total pinwheel blocks, but just as a refresher, the way you put them together is you draw a diagonal through the middle of one of your fabrics, and putting the 2 fabrics faces together, line up your corners very, very well, and then you're going to stitch down either side, 1/4 inch down either side of that line. A very important detail that I want you guys to remember and kind of stash in your toolbox is the use of a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. What that means is that your seam allowance is not going to be that exact 1/4 inch like we like to talk about. It's going to be just a little bit smaller. So it's going to look like, instead of stitching on the 1/4 inch mark here, you're going to stitch just a little bit inside of that 1/4 inch mark. Let me draw it and show you. So the pattern wants you to stitch 1/4 inch on either side of that diagonal line that you've drawn. But the thing that I want you guys to remember and to kind of stash in your toolbox is that you don't want to stitch a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance. You want to stitch what is called a scant. It's going to be just a little bit smaller than that 1/4 inch seam. So what that looks like is, here is your center diagonal seam. Hope you guys can see this. You have your center diagonal seam here, and I marked on either side the 1/4 inch seam that you would be aiming to stitch on, and you can draw them if you would like. But instead of stitching directly on that line, you're going to stitch just a hair inside the line. It's only going to be, maybe 1 thread, 2 threads inside the line. And this is what it's going to do. Once you stitch along those lines, a scant, then you're going to cut down this middle diagonal to separate your 2 pieces into 2 half square triangle blocks. You're going to need to trim, and if you've sewn a scant, that means that your pre-trimmed half square triangle block is going to be a little bit bigger than what is anticipated, and that is good because that gives you an opportunity to use your ruler and square it up so that it is the exact size that you need. I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about here. I've gotten the majority of my HST blocks done, half square triangle blocks done, but I just have these 2 left, and so let me go ahead and stitch those out. I'll press them, trim them, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about here. So if you guys can carefully see, my stitching is just on the inside of the blue line that I drew. This is what I'm talking about, a scant. If you want, you can draw the 2 lines on either side of your diagonal. On this one, I only drew the diagonal right down the middle. I did not do the lines on either side. Because I'm using a 1/4 inch foot on my machine, I don't have to have those extra lines on either side to know where a 1/4 of an inch is. I'm able to use my foot for guidance there. So I have done my stitching. They are a scant. And you can also see that I did some chain stitching. We've talked about this before also. It's just a way of sewing efficiently. When you have more than one of the same task that needs to be done, then you can chain sew and get those elements taken care of in one fell swoop. Do the same thing, all of the same thing at one time. Notice also, I'm not too concerned about cutting perfectly along my center line. It's pretty close, but it's not exact. That is okay. The thing that we're concerned about is the placement of the stitches, whether it's too far over toward the point or if it's sufficiently toward the center. I'm going to press, and since I have a darker and a lighter, I'm going to press my seam allowance to the darker side. I always try and use my wool pressing mat anytime I'm pressing. And then also the pen that I use to mark on my fabric is a friction pen made by Pilot. And it is a heat erasable pen, which means that as soon as I touch the heat of the iron to it, it disappears. So I have the blue here. I'm going to hit it with the iron and the blue disappears. It's magic. So I have 4 lovely hot half square triangle blocks that I've now created. And I'm going to trim them up to 3.5 inches. It's really important to have a square ruler of some sort that you can use to get your block elements square. I'm looking for a 3.5 inch finished block. And so here's my 3 inch, here's my 1/2 inch. And if I come down, follow that dotted line down, another 3.5 inches, I'm going to intersect a diagonal that I can see on my ruler at a 45-degree angle. That's going to hit in the bottom corner of my block as I am trimming. I think I'll probably make a trimming video at some point so you guys can get some really good in-depth information on how to square up your blocks. So I have my half square triangle blocks all trimmed up to 3.5 inches exactly. Once you have your half square triangle units all put together, you now need to make this pinwheel. I'm going to let you know that it's so very easy to put the pinwheel together incorrectly. Follow the diagram that you have in the pattern, and that's going to tell you how it needs to be done. Think about it in terms of your diagonals all coming in to meet in the center of your block. And don't let any two colors touch each other. You wouldn't put it together so that your browns are touching each other like that the diagonals are coming together in the middle, but the browns are touching. That makes what looks like a flying geese block. We don't want that. So I'm going to rotate it so that the brown and the pink are touching and your diagonals meet in the center. There you go. Now it's super easy when you're putting them together. It's really easy when you're putting them together to sew them. Remember, your points need to meet in the center, right? So it needs to come together like that instead. In order to put them together, we're going to fold over from left to right. Now the really cool thing is that since you pressed to the brown fabric, your seam allowances are going in opposite directions. So if I put the brown together with the pink, my seam allowances are going to go in opposite directions. On the top, it's pointed to my left, and on the bottom, it's pointed to my right. That's perfect because it's always easiest to get your blocks to fit together properly when your seams can nest. And so I'm just going to put the seams together and kind of push them together so that the higher sides meet. There we go. And I'll go ahead and pin. If your blocks were not squared up, they would not meet together as nicely as they do here. You would have gaps. Again, my brown and my pink are going to touch, brown and pink, which means that my seam allowances are going in opposite directions, and I definitely want that to happen. I'm going to sew along this edge on both of them, and then we'll look and see what they look like. So I went ahead and put these two half square triangle blocks together here and these two together here, and you can see that they are rotating in the same color combination as the two previous blocks that I've made. Before we go any farther, I want to address the question of pressing. Students always ask me, which way do I press? Do I press to the dark side, which is, you know, in the whole quilting lore, it's always that you press to the dark side because we have cookies. That's not always how it needs to be. When you decide which direction you want to press, you're looking first off to make sure that your block lays flat. Anything that is going to create bumps and waves in your block will be bad. So you want to press to try and eliminate those bumps. You can press open. You can see all of my seams on this one have been pressed open. That disperses the bulk so that it's not sitting on one side of the block or one side of the seam versus the other side. You can do it like that, or like with this one, I pressed them in one direction. So when they lay down, they're actually pointing in opposite directions. Now, if I press them all open and flat this way, it's hard to get your seams to match up perfectly, which ultimately is what you want your blocks to look like, where those seams just flow right into each other seamlessly. If your seams are pressed in opposite directions, then you can nest them, and it's easier to attain that seamless nested seam look. So I have that one to show you. I'm going to go ahead and stitch this one together and show you a way that you can have your seams going in opposite directions and turn them so that your block will lay flat. Oh, before I do that though, I do want to make a note. Once you have put your two half square triangle blocks together here, you can see it right here, your point should end about 1/4 of an inch below the edge of the block. You don't want your points to land right on the outside edge. You want that 1/4 inch because that, my friends, is your seam allowance. When you stitch across at 1/4 of an inch, then you're going to have the seam land right on that point, and your point will sit on the seam. It won't float and it won't fall in. It will look like this one here. All right, so I'm going to pin these two together and sew them and press it in such a way that I'm going to get it to be flat for you, and you'll be able to get another alternative to getting flat blocks. I have stitched 1/4 of an inch all the way along the edge, but this time, instead of just pressing the seams open there, I'm going to take this right in the middle, gently open it like that. All that's going to do is it's going to just break or separate really these stitches holding the middle piece of the block, and it's going to allow me to spin it so it opens up. How do we spin it? I can see that this vertical seam allowance is pushed over this way, so this next one needs to push down. This one goes to the right, so this one is going to come up. So they're going to spiral around the block. When I do that, look at how that little spiral opens up in the center. So from that little center spiral, I can press it right there, and that will help the block to lay flat. You can compare each one of the blocks and how they are pressed and see exactly which one lays most flat. For me, all the seam allowances opened out. These seam allowances pressed to the side so that they'll nest. And then this one with all of the seam allowances laying flat and spiraling around the block to make a little pinwheel in the middle. So when I flip them over, the one that I see is flat, most flat, is this one right here with the pinwheel. These two are also kind of flat. I have more of a bump on this one than I do here. But this pinwheel spiral is the most flat of the blocks. The beauty of quilting is that it doesn't have to be done one way all the time. You can pick and choose techniques and ways of pressing, ways of cutting, ways of putting things together that will produce the best quality quilt that you can. 3 different ways to press, 3 pretty flat blocks. I like these 2 best myself, but you decide the way you want to press it. Oftentimes you'll have a pattern that tells you exactly which way to press. This pattern does not tell you which way. It lets you make that decision, but now you know different ways to do it. The next element that we need to make to put into this pinwheel block, this pinwheel star block, is the flying geese. And to do that, you're going to need a 6.5 by 3.5 inch square, one of your 3.5 inch squares in one color and another 3.5 in another color. Unlike the half square triangle block where you stitched on either side of your diagonal, this time you're going to stitch directly on your diagonal. It is important though that you know exactly which way your patterns are going to lie so that they'll match up properly. If you fold your colored squares on the diagonal and just lay them onto your rectangle like this, then you can see when I put what will be the flying geese element onto the pinwheel block, the browns match. That's the way that I want to do it. So what I'm going to do is match up my browns on my white fabric and stitch those down. It's the stitch and flip method. I'm going to stitch directly on the line and flip it out toward the brown. I'm only going to do the brown fabrics first. So I stitched them all together. So I'm just going to snip these apart, cut off the extra, and press them. It is important to remember that scant 1/4 of an inch. I stitched just a hair outside, not in toward the off-white fabric. I stitched just a hair to the outer corner of the brown fabric. That gives me just a smidge more fabric to work with when I'm trimming down. So now I have all of the browns that I need that are stitched onto my white rectangle, all going in the same direction, and I used a scant 1/4 inch. Now I'm going to attach my pink. I'm going to lay my pink so that the diagonal is meeting the brown in the center. And yes, guys, it is going to overlap, okay? Don't be afraid of that overlap. It has to. Remember, anytime you're making blocks like this, you need that 1/4 inch of overlap, because it's that overlap that's going to sit inside your seam allowance and allow your point to float right on top of your seam. So I'm gonna lay these down and stitch them. Okay guys, so I did my pink side of my flying geese blocks, units, my flying geese unit, the same exact way as I did the brown side. It was to lay the pink fabric face down with the diagonal pointed at my brown, stitch directly on the diagonal, just a scant on the outside. I say directly on, but it's not a 1/4 of an inch outside. It's just a scant on the outside of the diagonal. Clip it and flip it. The seam allowances when you do your flying geese blocks need to be pointed out toward the 2 small triangles that have been attached to the rectangular piece. Make sure that your fabrics point in that direction. If you need a refresher, a little bit more detail on how to make flying geese blocks, you can refer back to one of the previous episodes that I've done and you'll see it. The block that has the pink flying geese going all the way around, that one will definitely help you as a refresher on how to make your flying geese blocks. So in assembling, we're going to put a flying goose on each side of your center pinwheel and then fill in the blanks with a white square. And that, my friends, your pinwheel star. From this point, it's just a matter of doing a 9 patch. Sewing a 9 patch, that's not such a difficult thing. Sewing this row, top row, center row, bottom row, pressing in opposite directions. So you're going to press to the white, you're going to press this one in toward the center, and then this one out toward the white. That way you'll be able to get your seams to nest, and then you can do the horizontal seams to finish it up. So I'm going to quickly go ahead and do that right now. I have the 3 rows on my block assembled, and now all I have are the 2 horizontal seams that need to be stitched together. I went ahead and pinned them, both sides of them actually, the top one and the bottom. But I wanted to show you, give you another little tip before I finish sewing. When you're dealing with what is basically a 9 patch like this is, you need to start by pinning these 2 outside seams, the primary outside seam. Don't worry so much, like if I look on this side, don't worry so much about the diagonals first, what's going on in the center first. Try and get these primary vertical seams pinned first, because once you do that, then if need be, you can give your fabric just a little bit of a tug to make everything lay flat and pin the center and put extra pins in if you need. Prime example of that is here. Now I did pin my 2 outside seams. This brown to brown lays pretty flat, but this pink to pink does not. And as I sew, I'm going to just give this little one a little bit of a tug. Do you see how it comes together? But if I had pinned from one side all the way across to the other, I would not get these primary verticals together, and it would kind of hang off on the outside edge, even though it would make these middle sections lay flat. I wouldn't have a block that fits together properly or fits together well. Get the verticals, then worry about the rest of them. I'm going to go ahead and sew this side and sew the other side really quickly. Press it. I am going to press those seams open. Remember, we were talking about which way to press. This one, I do tend to press my last seams open. So that's what I'll do here, and I'll show you in just a bit. All right, so guys, I went ahead and pressed everything flat. Those last 2 seams, they're laying vertically here, but they were horizontal before. Last 2 seams I pressed, and I pressed them open because I'm trying to attain a very flat block as much as I can. I think it is absolutely lovely. Reminds me of an ice cream cone. You know, the cone with some strawberry ice cream. I think I need some tonight. The other thing that I want you to notice about this block, the finished block, is that the ends aren't uneven. Everything is even and squared up. And that is because as we were working on it, the half square triangles, and then I didn't show it, but also the flying geese blocks, they need to be squared. Everything needs to square up before it comes together into the final block so that you don't have any extending edges on your final block. And when you put it into the big quilt as a whole, it just goes in seamlessly. It's a lovely, lovely thing. If you guys have made it to this point, you should have subscribed, because you're gonna get other videos that are gonna give you more tools and tips to put into that toolbox so that you'll be able to make great, wonderful, beautiful quilts on your own. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please share it with your friends. My website info is down below, so you can click on the website and see the patterns and the kit pieces that I do have available for you. Let's just continue sewing together. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you with the next video. Bye.